the spring of 1956, Soviet soldiers broke into a secret tunnel beneath Berlin, packed wall to wall with American wiretapping equipment. Still warm, still humming. Moscow was furious. The Americans had dug beneath the Soviet sector, straight into the Red Army's own telephone lines, and listened for nearly a year. It looked like one of the great intelligence disasters of the Cold War. It wasn't, because the KGB had known about the tunnel before the first shovel of dirt was ever turned. They watched it being built. They let it run. This is Operation Gold, the most audacious wiretap of the Cold War, and the secret reason the Soviets allowed it to happen. In the 1950s, Berlin was the espionage capital of the world. A city split in half, east and west, cheek to cheek, and crawling with spies on both sides of the line. And the West was scared. What kept American generals awake was the fear of a surprise attack. Soviet tank armies rolling west with no warning at all. They had good reason to feel blind. In the late 1940s, the Soviets had overhauled their codes, and the West's window into Moscow's military had slammed shut almost overnight. But there was another way in. In Vienna, British intelligence had already pulled off something remarkable. Short tunnels, dug to secretly tap Soviet military cables. It worked. And in Berlin, the prize was bigger. Just inside the Soviet sector, buried beside a highway, ran 3 cables carrying the Red Army's telephone and telegraph traffic. Headquarters, commanders, Moscow itself. The cables sat a few hundred yards from the American line. So the CIA and Britain's Secret Intelligence Service made a decision that bordered on madness. Dig a tunnel, a quarter of a mile long, under the most heavily watched border on Earth, and wire the Soviet Army for sound. In Washington, the director of the CIA, Allen Dulles, personally signed off on the gamble. The stakes cut both ways. If it worked, the West might hear an invasion coming before the first tank engine turned over. If it were discovered, American soldiers would be caught tunneling into Soviet territory, in the most dangerous city on Earth. The man running it in Berlin was a legend of the agency, a pistol-carrying former FBI man named Bill Harvey. They just had one problem to solve first. How do you dig a tunnel into enemy territory without anyone noticing the dirt? The answer was hiding in plain sight. On the edge of the American sector, the U.S. Army built what looked like an ordinary military warehouse, with a radar antenna on top. To Soviet observers, it was obviously some kind of listening post. That was the point. Let them think they'd figured it out, while the real secret went underground. The rule was absolute. Not 1 cubic foot of soil could leave the site. So they built the warehouse with a deep basement, and as the tunnel advanced, some 3,000 tons of earth were quietly swallowed into it, ton by ton, out of sight. Through the winter of 1954 into 1955, the diggers pushed nearly 1,500 feet, under the border, under the guards, under a busy highway, into the Soviet sector. Engineers even chilled the tunnel, so its warmth wouldn't melt the snow above it into one long, telltale stripe pointing at the target. Then, in a chamber at the far end, specialists performed the surgery. 3 Soviet cables, opened and tapped without ever going dead. In May of 1955, the operation went live, and the take was staggering. Hundreds of circuits, voice calls, coded teletype, running day and night onto tape. The tapes were flown to London and to Washington, where armies of translators and transcribers worked through them, conversation by conversation. For 11 months and 11 days, the West sat inside the Red Army's own phone lines. They thought it was the intelligence coup of the decade. They had no idea what it really was. His name was George Blake, a decorated officer of British intelligence and a Soviet agent. Captured in the Korean War, held in a prison camp, he had come home with a secret. Somewhere along the way, he had switched sides. And in the London meetings where the tunnel was planned, Blake wasn't just in the room. By his own account, he helped take the minutes. Moscow knew about Operation Gold before construction ever began. which left the KGB with an impossible choice. Shut the tunnel down, and the West would start hunting for the leak, and the trail might lead straight to their most valuable man. Or let it run. Let the enemy burrow under the border. Let them tap the army's own lines. They chose the mole. For a year, the KGB let the West listen, and by most accounts, they guarded the secret so tightly that they never even warned the Red Army officers whose calls were being recorded. Which raises the obvious question: was it all a trap? A year of carefully staged lies, fed down the wire. The CIA spent years worrying about exactly that, and its own declassified review reached a remarkable conclusion. The intelligence was genuine. The Soviets had let real secrets flow, because to the KGB, protecting George Blake was worth more than anything the West could hear. One man was worth more than the Army's privacy. Then came the spring rains. In April 1956, flooding knocked out cables all over East Berlin, and repair crews went digging. In the small hours of April 22nd, one of those crews, working by lamplight beside the highway, uncovered something that should not have existed: a tap chamber, wired into the cables, leading down into the earth and west. The Americans heard it all happen. Through their own microphones, at 6:30 that morning, came the words they had dreaded for a year: "The cable is tapped." By that afternoon, the lines were cut. The tunnel was over. Whether the rain was honest luck or the excuse Moscow had been waiting for, historians argue to this day. The Soviets threw the tunnel open to the world's press, expecting outrage at American treachery. It backfired. Reporters walked through the steel tube, marveled at the engineering, and the coverage read less like a scandal than a compliment. Even Berliners came out to see it, like a tourist attraction. The deeper secret held for 5 more years. In 1961, George Blake was finally exposed. A British court sentenced him to 42 years, the longest sentence in modern British history. 1 year, the newspapers said, for every agent he had betrayed. He served 5. In 1966, Blake went over the wall of Wormwood Scrubs prison on a rope ladder, vanished, and surfaced in Moscow, where he lived out his life as a Soviet hero to the age of 98. He outlived the Cold War itself. And decades later, when the CIA finally declassified its own secret history of the operation, the verdict inside was the strangest part of all. The tunnel had been betrayed before the first shovel of dirt was turned. And still, by the agency's own reckoning, it had been worth it. Which leaves the question that still hangs over that muddy field in Berlin. The West got 11 months of the Red Army's secrets. The KGB kept its man. Both sides walked away convinced they had won. Maybe that's the real lesson of Berlin, the city where even the truth worked for both sides. Neither confirm nor deny.